And he's pretty radical. And in his big kind of launch speech about this, is all on the public record, you can find this online, he very dryly describes the buyer employee handbook, which in his words is 1,370.
The German pharmaceutical company?
1,370 pages, which in his words makes it slightly longer than War and Peace and a lot less exciting. And having just read War and Peace, I can confirm that it is more exciting than reading an employee handbook, let me tell you. But think about your own employer. Anybody listening to this, think about your own employer and the range of policies that you are subject to at any one time. And basically, if you are in breach of any of those policies, it's a disciplinary issue. Those policies probably run to hundreds of pages, if not thousands of pages, like the buyer example. How on earth, even if it was your full-time job just to know the policies and be compliant with them, you couldn't know all of that information. You couldn't remember all that information. You couldn't possibly comply with all of it because a whole bunch of it will contradict each other or be unclear. But the response to this is always the same. The response is always, we need more policy. We need more rules. Anything goes wrong, we're going to write a policy. We're going to expand the policy. It's this idea that we can somehow understand, document, and control the world with information, with rules. This idea that people are logical, that the world is logical, that organizations are logical. And it completely misunderstands human nature. Humans are not data processing robots. Humans, and I use this line a lot in the book, humans are social, emotional, tribal, storytelling animals. And trying to fit us into these neat boxes doesn't really work. And the whole gist of the book is that I think most of us, if not everybody, knows deep down that this doesn't work. But yet we keep on doing it.
Wow. Let me ask you this. What was the most fun chapter to write? Really?
There is a chapter on personality. So I guess I'll just outline the structure of the book briefly. It's a book in 4 parts. The first part is work, and that is a series of chapters about the absurdities of modern work and the backstories to those things, how those things came about. Those were pretty fun to write, and I'll come back to those in a moment. The second part is myth, and that's 5 chapters really unpicking this myth of human nature that, whether or not we realize it, underpins the workplace. The third part is human, and that is really a very broad-ranging survey of the latest thinking in those academic disciplines I talked about: anthropology, behavioral economics, neuroscience, psychology.
So this is the failed narratives, Homo economicus, or if you want, a rational economics.
Correct.
For example, personality can be divided into 4 very nicely shaped boxes, all these kind of guiding narratives. And then you get to the third section of the book where you say, well, this is our best,
how humans really are.
Best thinking as a species from, you named about 10 disciplines or so, but this is our best current thinking on what actually happens to show the disconnect between the nonsense and the first. And I guess if I put the 3 sections together, it's like, here's a bunch of ridiculous bullshit that happens at work. Here are the guiding myths and narratives that make that bullshit happen.
Correct.
Here's what appears to be so about human beings, which might have helped us avoid some of the horse shit in the first 2 sections.
Beautifully put.
Well, I just say thank you, old chap.
And hi, this is Paul Gibbons. I've spent nearly 30 years at the intersection of technology and human systems, formerly as a senior advisor to Deloitte and then a partner at IBM, and their thought leader on the future of work and behavioral science. Today, I serve as a keynote speaker and board advisor on AI strategy, adoption, and ethics. My work is anchored in three areas. One, think bigger, think better, where we move beyond tech solutionism to rational systemic problem solving while retaining the progress ethos. Second, Great Collisions book series explores how markets, medicine, enterprises, and science collide with synthetic intelligences. And finally, People First AI, as the author of The Science of Organizational Change and 7 other books on organization change and culture, I frequently open big global culture change conferences. And today, as explored in the book Adopting AI, I show that the acid test for AI is how it's going to benefit humankind. That framework is currently being used by successful adopters in the Fortune 100. This book demonstrates that a people-first approach works best because trust and literacy are the only ways to speed adoption in a world this complex. Think Bigger, Think Better is about how we create that better future. And now on to our guest.
My guest today is James Healy. He's a remarkable guy. I worked briefly for Deloitte, where I was an advisor to their change practice, their human capital practice. And one of the things I said is we need to bake behavioral science if we want to achieve behavioral change with clients. We need to bake behavioral science into our approaches to change. Most approaches to change focus on persuading people something is a good idea. It's a very fallible project. And no one in the United States was doing it. No one in London was doing it. Someone said, there's a guy in Australia, you should talk to James Healy. I called up this strange fellow in Perth, Western Australia, a remote corner of the world, at least from our perspective in the United States or United Kingdom. James was doing exactly the things that I thought the rest of the practice should be doing. He had baked behavioral science into his approaches to culture change and his approaches to organizational change. He was everything I had imagined when I wrote my book, The Science of Organizational Change, in 2015. And not only that, he's a remarkable human being. He's got an incredible track record. Not only is he a consummate practitioner, but James is also a really deep thinker. Today, he's the founder and managing director of the Behavior Boutique. He's the former global lead of Deloitte Behavior First. He is a global transformation specialist, having run projects in 60 plus countries and 6 continents. His big ideas, and you're about to hear one of them, is BS at work, why so much of modern work is bullshit, and how behavioral science can make it better. He is also known for the Be Human mandate, designing work for social and emotional beings, not a logical calculator. That makes him a contributor to the conversation on the future of work. He believes in results over rituals, replacing box ticking, about which we'll talk in a minute, with evidence-based outcomes. And I consider him to be one of the foremost pioneers in the world on behavioral science and organizational change. You can find him on LinkedIn, James Healy, Behavior Boutique. You can find him at www.thebehaviorboutique.com. You have to spell behavior with a U, though, because he lives in Australia. And his podcast is called The B Word, which is on libsyn.com. So now let's welcome James and get on to our conversation. Thank you.
So it's great to congratulations on publishing BS at Work.
Thank you.
Listeners don't know that James and I wrote a book together called Adopting AI, finished in April. And about 3 weeks later, he published BS at Work. I'm exaggerating slightly. It was only months later. And it's a magnificent book.
Thank you. It was about a year in the making. A number of people have asked me how I managed to finish it so quickly after Adopting AI. The reality is it was 80% done before we started Adopting AI. So Adopting AI was sandwiched in the middle of BS at Work. And to give it its full title, BS at Work, Why So Much of Modern Work is Bullshit and How Behavioral Science Can Make It Better.
There you go. And why is so much of my... I asked you this question, an hour and a half. Why is so much of modern work bullshit? I think most people would agree. I don't think most people have thought through just why as much as you have.
It's funny. I think everyone I've mentioned the title to has kind of the same reaction. There's this knowing smirk, there's a laugh, and then they will usually segue into, well, you think you've seen some bullshit? Well, you should see XYZ organization. And I think regardless of how well the book does commercially, that is vindication enough for me. I don't think I've yet met anyone who has looked at me puzzled as to why someone might.
How could you?
Exactly. Like, what do you mean bullshit? There's no bullshit in the world. I don't understand. Maybe that person is out there. I don't know. I suspect they're not listening to this. I think the best way to answer your question, is to start with the story I tell at the start of the book. And that was the story that finally pushed me to write this book, which I'd been thinking about writing for years. And I won't play coy with where I was at, because my employment history is very clear on LinkedIn. I was at Deloitte at the time, and I had spent 5 years at Deloitte at that point. Prior to that, I'd spent 15 years in big banks. This story could have happened in any of my previous employers, and I suspect it could happen, has happened in many of the listeners' employees. I, along with 400,000 people across Deloitte worldwide, was required to complete a mandatory e-learning.
Well, thank God for that.
You know the sorts, hammer
Yeah, I do
dialogue.
Did it all the time at IBM. There was, I'd say, something like 5 to 7 hours a year of absolutely mandatory. And of all the things, it was extraordinary about this, if I may put in a slight tangent, of all the things that leaders can insist upon in terms of setting standards, setting a vision, delegating to people, making sure that shit happens, this was the one that they never, ever, like, if you had other stuff that you were doing for them, they were not great at holding you accountable. But these 7 hours, God help you if you hadn't done it on time. Now, all right, you carry on, but it was quite a revelation to me how these mandatory e-learning stood out. Anyway, you tell me about your mandatory e-learning.
So it's the Thursday afternoon before Easter. I'm going away for a week. Fairly rare for me, coming towards the end of the day just before I go on holiday, and I've kind of got everything in control. I'm not going to be working late to scramble to get things done. I've got things under control. And then the reminder pops up, the mandatory e-learning, and it's due next week. So basically at 4:00 on the Thursday before Easter, I have to get this thing done. 45 minutes. 45 minutes.
So the word, I mean, the mandatory cybersecurity training at IBM is 2.5 hours. So anyway, carry on. 45 minutes, bad enough.
The topic of the mandatory e-learning.
Yeah.
How to do mandatory e-learnings.
The fuck out of here. Excuse my French. That's crazy.
The background to this, one of the big four, not Deloitte, one of the others had got some big regulatory fine in the US because it had emerged that in their audit practice, their accountants had been cheating on mandatory e-learnings for which they got CPA points or some kind of continuing retain their accountancy qualification. And basically what they've been doing is they give the e-learning to the assistant or the junior in the team. They've always got multiple choice answers. They go through, get the multiple choice answers. They then share those around the team.
That's quite intelligent.
So in order to respond to this gigantic fine and this warning, this shot across the bows from the regulators, Deloitte had decided that the solution to people not doing mandatory e-learnings properly is a mandatory e-learning. And it struck me on this Thursday afternoon, satire is dead. Like there is,
you couldn't make
there
this.
is, no, this is a Monty Python sketch that got cut because it was too stupid.
Yeah.
And it caused me to ask myself a question, which I have asked many times over my career in many different organizations.
Yeah.
And the question is this: does anybody actually think this is going to work? And it has always struck me that it's a binary question. There are two possible answers to that. Yes, somebody somewhere at a reasonably senior level is so dumb that they actually think this is going to work.
Yeah.
Or no, nobody thinks this is going to work. Everyone knows this is a complete waste of everyone's time, but we're doing it anyway.
Yeah. Holy shit.
I still don't know which of those answers is a more damning indictment of corporate life.
Huh. Yeah, well, I mean, now you put it that way, and that's, I guess, the great function of your book, is because we kind of take these things for granted. It's a Thursday afternoon, it's 4 p.m., you're trying to get out of there, you hustle through the 45 minutes, and you could have been annoyed by it, but you were sitting there, you were a frame of mind because you're a bullshit SOB, and then saying, like, what does this have to do with the plight of the modern workplace? And you said, here I am taking e-learning about doing e-learnings. Honestly, you can't make it up. I mean, Severance and Black Mirror kind of stuff. And it's an extraordinary thing. And I mean, I don't want to speculate like somebody thinks it's a good idea, but I mean, would there have been a better way to get people to do e-learnings in a compliant way? I mean, there are lots of ways, so they're a lot more time consuming, I should imagine. What would you have done? What would you have done? Like, what would you, if somebody sit down and say, we're going to have this mandatory e-learning for 45 minutes on how to do an e-learning. But James, what do you think of that idea? What might you have said what might you offer as an alternative?
My response to that would be, what is the problem that we're trying to solve here?
Yes.
And it seems to me that the problem we're trying to solve...
Start at the very beginning, a very good place to start.
Well, it seems to me that the problem that we're trying to solve here is that employees, for whatever reason, don't take mandatory e-learnings seriously.
Okay,
they know that they're performative bullshit.
Some skills that we think everybody has to have, some skills to awareness everybody has to have, and e-learnings are preferred method of delivering it.
I think, is anybody actually trying to teach anybody anything with an e-learning? Is the objective really knowledge transfer? Is it behavior change? Or is the objective,
nobody understands that
so
stuff.
often?
That's the back half of the book. Nobody understands that these kind of they don't produce behavioral change. I mean, there's plenty of very good research on that, but nobody of a serious mind thinks that these do anything very useful.
No. And so what they do is they tick a box. They allow the demonstration of progress. They frankly allow the employer to go back to the regulator and say, see, we're taking this seriously.
Plus, reminds me of a cartoon with someone walking through a row of cubicles, the boss walking through a row of cubicles. He says, people, look busy. Jesus is coming. Is that kind of performative is a word that's creeping its way. I think it's a very good word because a lot of, it's BS at work isn't my idea. And I think the great gift of your book is that I've been in the workplace since, well, depends when you count, but the 1980 or earlier. And you just kind of suck it up. Now, there are some very good questions as to why you do that. I thought that was one of the interesting things about Severance, too. Because Severance is a lot about power. And you might think to yourself, why the fuck are they doing these ridiculous things? And what is the power? Because in Severance, the reason it's so creepy, and by the way, listeners, if you haven't watched it, you have to at least give it a try. I know it's not for everybody, but it's a great commentary about our work. But in Severance, like, what's the source of power? Because it's not coercive power. In other words, they can't shoot you. So what is the nature? And they had this teenage girl in Severance, now in Killian, for people who watched it, who was 14 or something like that, who's managing a team of 40-somethings. And so what's the source of her power? And I guess that's the question in organizations as well. And I sucked it up for so much of my career. You just kind of, even though I'm a pretty ballsy guy, just kind of do what you're told and kind of stupid, but.
So one of the things that I think about that is, and I do talk about this in the book, I think there's various answers to that question, but I think one of the answers in certain contexts is no one ever teaches you how to do work. So depending on what your job is, you may or may not have done a qualification, a degree that is relevant to some extent, but actually much of what you do in the workplace is at best tangentially related to what you've studied.
That uniform now, does that exist in the professions? For example, my mind flew to medicine or biochemistry or something like that, where what you will learn in university tracks what you do at work pretty closely. Are you primarily directing this criticism at the business world, the work of marketing and consultants and all that? Are we jaded by our combined, how many combined years experience in big consulting do you and I have between us? 25 years, maybe. Is it a big consulting disease or is it question?
I think it's certainly an office worker disease. Then again, I suspect if we had doctors or lawyers on this call now, I suspect they could wax lyrical about the level of mandatory, ridiculous bullshit that they have to do. We're just not as familiar with it.
But doctors tell me, I read some research that they spend an inordinate amount of time writing down the notes of their 8-minute family doctor sees you for 8 minutes, and they spend the next 20 writing up the history, which is one of the problems that artificial intelligence and these medical information systems are trying to solve. It should be an easy problem to solve. Just record the bloody thing and have AI transcribe it and put it in the right database. But in fact, I have a friend who's trying to sell a product that does precisely that. You do run into problems in patient confidentiality and consent to record and quality issues and But so I think your criticism is fair, but I think you and I have worked in knowledge work. You know why I went into management consulting? Someone said, you're a very clever guy. He says, I was not working at the time trying to figure out what to do with my life when I was 32 years old. You should go into management consulting. That's what all the smart people do. All right. I've never heard of management consulting. I trudged off back to the library where they had these things. They didn't have Amazon in those days. Today, I would just click, and it would be there in 2 hours. So I charged myself with the business school. Then I read a book on management consulting. I thought, yeah, that sounds all right. I'll do that. Anyway, talk about spending 30 years in a career you fell into because that's where the smart people go.
And I think in different ways, that's so many people. And I think so much of work, so much of what we all do at work is just learned through observation, subconsciously or consciously. Running a meeting. Think of how much time you spend in meetings. How many people get sat down and taught how to run a meeting?
Exactly. No, yeah, exactly. Or delegating, or giving feedback, or giving a performance review, or whatever it may be. All of those kind of things in the good managers toolkit. I learned them when I was 20 something by watching other people, but it's like 13-year-old boys explaining how to have sex with one another. Like, who taught them? And then in that stage, yeah, I guess the question is performative is a lot of, I guess your definition of BS at work doesn't stop at stuff that's purely performative. So I guess there's more.
No, there certainly is. And underlying the book, and the book it's loosely about work. It's loosely about behavioral science. And by behavioral science, I mean anthropology, behavioral economics, neuroscience, psychology, sociology, all of those academic disciplines that study humans and human nature and human behavior. But I guess at the heart, certainly of behavioral economics, is this critique of the idea that humans are rational, logical calculation machines. And this idea that the world is rational and logical. And so much, not all, but so much of the workplace bullshit comes down to this misunderstanding of human nature. This idea that if you give people information, they will read and absorb all of the information.
And
they will
their behavior. Thank you for enlightening me. I'll do exactly as suggested in the text. Yeah,
correct.
But no one ever.
Correct. And if you think about it, certainly applies to e-learnings. It applies to so much else. It applies to policies. One of the stories I mentioned in the book, Bayer, the huge German agricultural and pharmaceuticals company, is about 150 years old. It is undergoing an existential crisis. And about 18 months, 2 years ago, they changed the CEO, and the CEO launched a huge transformation program to radically overhaul their ways of working, their structure.
Of course, what else?
And he's pretty radical. And in his big kind of launch speech about this, on the public record, you can find this online, he very dryly describes the Bayer employee handbook, which in his words is 1,370.
The German pharmaceutical company?
1,370 pages which in his words makes it slightly longer than War and Peace and a lot less exciting. And having just read War and Peace, I can confirm that it is more exciting than reading an employee handbook, let me tell you. But think about your own employer. Anybody listening to this, think about your own employer and the range of policies that you are subject to at any one time. And basically, if you are in breach of any of those policies, it's a disciplinary issue. Those policies probably run to hundreds of pages, if not thousands of pages, like the buyer example. How on earth, even if it was your full-time job just to know the policies and be compliant with them, you couldn't know all of that information. You couldn't remember all that information. You couldn't possibly comply with all of it because a whole bunch of it will contradict each other or be unclear. But the response to this is always the same. The response is always, we need more policy. We need more rules. Anything goes wrong, we're going to write a policy. We're going to expand the policy. It's this idea that we can somehow understand, document, and control the world with information, with rules. This idea that people are logical, that the world is logical, that organizations are logical. And it completely misunderstands human nature. Humans are not data processing robots. Humans, and I use this line a lot in the book, humans are social, emotional, tribal, storytelling animals. And trying to fit us into these neat boxes doesn't really work. And the whole gist of the book is that I think most of us, if not everybody, knows deep down that this doesn't work. But yet we keep on doing it.
Wow. Let me ask you this. What was the most fun chapter to write? Really?
There is a chapter on personality. So I guess I'll just outline the structure of the book briefly. It's a book in 4 parts. The first part is work, and that is a series of chapters about the absurdities of modern work and the backstories to those things, how those things came about. Those were pretty fun to write, and I'll come back to those in a moment. The second part is myth, and that's 5 chapters really unpicking this myth of human nature that, whether or not we realize it, underpins the workplace. The third part is human, and that is really a very broad-ranging survey of the latest thinking in those academic disciplines I talked about: anthropology, behavioral economics, neuroscience, psychology.
So this is the failed narratives, Homo economicus, or if you want, a rational economics.
Correct.
For example, personality can be divided into 4 very nicely shaped boxes, all these kind of guiding narratives. And then you get to the third section of the book where you say, well, this is our
How
best
humans really are.
best thinking as a species from, you named about 10 disciplines or so, but this is our best current thinking on what actually happens to show the disconnect between the nonsense and the first. And I guess if I put the 3 sections together, it's like, here's a bunch of ridiculous bullshit that happens at work. Here are the guiding myths and narratives that make that bullshit happen.
Correct.
Here's what appears to be so about human beings, which might have helped us avoid some of the horseshit in the first 2 sections.
Beautifully put.
Really, I just say thank you, old chap.
In terms of the chapter that was the most fun to write, there is a chapter in the first section about personality, and it explores the obsession that organizations have with personality as a concept. And a big part of that is personality testing. So I talk about Myers-Briggs, I talk about DISC, I talk about the backstories to those things, which are hilarious. I talk about an online dating app based purely around Myers-Briggs. That is a thing.
Is it really?
Called So Synced. They raised £1 million, so £1 million in funding. I think I looked them up again recently. I think they've now pivoted away from being a dating app, and they're now just providing content. But that chapter also talks about the other aspect of personality, the obsession with these generational stereotypes. So the idea that we have never had a workplace with 5 generations in it. We have boomers, we have Gen X, we have millennials, etc., etc.
That might be mostly true.
I just unpick that whole concept.
Just because we live longer and people don't retire anymore, and that might be somewhat true. But what the research shows is that there's no meaningful way to group people by demographic cohorts, by generation cohorts.
Correct. The example I give.
I even find myself talking about myself as a boomer, and I joke with my kids about being Gen Zs. And I suppose there's that kind of, is there anything between boomer and Gen Z that wouldn't be explained by a 65-year-old man talking to a 15-year-old?
Correct.
Very little. And that's the thing that even before I studied this, and I didn't make a huge study or something like that, I read something that said the boomer generation are more concerned with, I don't know, security or something like that. And the younger generation's values are more concerned with learning and career advancement. I thought, wow, holy shit, who would have thought that? The older people are more interested in hanging on to a job until they collect them, and the younger people are more interested in learning and advancement. That's an extraordinary thing. And I did say, I think this was some idiot on LinkedIn posted it. I did say how much of that is explained by different life stages, which is another way to look at differences between human beings. Maybe not. Anyway, you love generational stuff as much as I do, but I find myself using it all the time. It's a convenient shorthand for difference. I don't know. Yeah,
and I think you're absolutely right.
I think 95% of people believe that shit. By the way, incidentally, I think 95% of the people believe that there are measurable differences between organizations.
Completely,
generational.
Completely. And in that chapter, I just very methodically go through, and I raised the slightly absurd examples which must exist of, I think the cutoff point for Gen X to millennial was 1980. So if you were born in 1980, you're a Gen X. If you're born in 1981, you're a millennial. So I was born in early 1981, so I'm a millennial. Half of my school friends in my year at school.
I don't like you. Anyway.
Half of my friends in my year at school were supposedly a different generation. Now take this to its logical extreme. If you were born at 11:59 p.m. on New Year's Eve, you're Gen X. If you were born at 1 minute past midnight on the 2 minutes later, you're a different generation.
Yeah.
Do the boundaries apply? And the answer, of course, when you spell it out like that, no one would say, well, yes, they do. They would say, well, no, clearly they don't. And then you look at how consistent or applicable are these generational stereotypes within a cohort. And there's no canonical list of what the attributes are. And if you Google it, there's just a whole array of blog posts and articles that people have published with lists and lists and lists of 20 characteristics. And you look at them and they're all fairly general. They're all positive. You probably pick for your own cohort, half of them apply. They don't tell you anything at all. And they assume that when you were born is the overarching determinant of your personality and your behavior. They ignore where you were born. So we're saying that two millennials.
It doesn't matter whether you were born in Adelaide, Australia, or Kinshasa, or whatever. Correct. So what matters is your generational alignment. That is funny. That's really stupid. if you put it that way, but
right. And you can just keep on picking this. You can keep on picking it, and as you say, 95% of people, I would imagine, believe this stuff. Organizations seem to treat this stuff as real. HR departments have whole initiatives around how we're going to deal with a multi-generational workplace.
Probably there's so much built on that in Harvard Business Review and a bullshit publication. But I mean, wrongly esteemed business publications, Boston Consulting Group and Bain, and I dare say maybe even McKinsey, who generally speaking are slightly less stupid than the rest of them. Did I just say that? That's a horrible thing to say. But anyway, yeah, very interesting. Very interesting.
And if you pull the thread on this, Paul, where you get to is, again, the sort of underlying assumption here that most of us tend to share, and that certainly underpins much in the workplace, not just this generational stuff, or indeed the ridiculous personality testing. But what underpins this is this idea that everybody has a fixed personality and everybody's behavior is just a function of their kind of internal essence, for want of a better word.
Well, they've been for a very long time. I mean, and I think that goes at least back to the Greeks and probably much further back than that.
Correct.
There used to be
Correct.
temperaments, choleric. In my book, Change Myths, a cheap plug. In my book, Change Myths, we do talk about personality testing, and we have this picture of these 4 old geezers, and those before the days of Myers-Briggs. These were the flags. They're choleric, phlegmatic,
Yep,
or whatever. I do think, one of these things, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if I want to go there, but it's interesting why myths persist. I mean, I covered it in my book, and you spent some time in that. Why do people still believe in astrology? I have a friend who's a very smart guy who uses charts to try and decide what to do in the stock market. He's got these elaborate diagrams and something like that. 99% complete bullshit pseudoscience. To which his response would be, well, I looked at this in this chart and I did this and this happened. And there's no, again, this kind of efficient forgetting the causality is like, did it happen because of, and do you remember the times that you drew these funny pictures on the chart and nothing happened? Anyway, whatever. But so the question is why flat Earth, and what are some other good ones? I mean, there are more important ones. Climate denialism. I mean, why does this shit persist? Well, there are lots of reasons for that particular. Why does astrology persist? I mean, I get dating profiles. I'd say half the dating profiles I see have someone says, "Oh, I'm a Sagittarius." When someone asks me my star sign, by the way, I refuse to answer these days. It makes me a pretty big arsehole in most people's eyes. Anyway, why do they? But I do. The thing is, usually, by the way, you dropped the ball because you said there are 3 sections, and
the 4th section.
There's the drum roll. What's the drum?
And the fourth section is quite short. It's just 2 chapters, but it is essentially, what do we do about all this? So pulls it all together. Synthesis of the first 3. That chapter is called Diagnosis, and then the final chapter is Prescription. And
well, I want to give
alert.
Big podcast pitch and just say, first of all, James is I don't know how many books you read a year, how many nonfiction books you read a year, about 1 a week, maybe more.
I try and read 1 a week. War and Peace slowed me down, let me tell you.
That's more than an average American Republican reads in a lifetime. But anyway, he does that, and these books are taken not from bullshit management books, but from the apex of human thinking right now, on things like biology and things like evolution and things like neuroscience and things like academic psychology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 8 disciplines, 10 disciplines. And James covers them in a way that is really accessible. But I do want to say the other shout out that I have for the book is it's very, very funny in places. Perhaps listeners will have a sense of that when we talk about the e-learning in order to tell people how to do e-learnings. At the beginning, it's replete with these kind of hilarious, absurd, schadenfreude, or whatever you want to call it, moments. So both manages to be really kind of very nerdy, also very practical. James, it could have been an academic. For his sins, he's been a worker bee for 20 years before. When did you go out on your own? About January.
A year ago, pretty much.
Almost a year ago. But most of his life has been in business, so most of his life has been trying to do things practically and not just kind of think about them and write about them, which is the life of most business school professors. So it's very practical, I'm famous for saying most business books aren't worth the paper they're written on, because they're either trivial or they're false or they're, they fail to do the thing that you do, which is say, a load of shit. Because why? You're a business school professor. There's one of them, my friends, a Jesuit priest, said something very vulgar. He says, "You don't piss on the altar," and that's the priest. It was okay for him to say it. So the book is three things. It's academically really interesting stuff. It's very practical because there's lots of examples from contemporary work, like this, and it's very, very funny. So I say that for listeners who BS It Works on Amazon. It's probably $25 or $20 or whatever it is, or something like that. Probably unlike any business book I've ever written. I mean, I said in my review on Amazon that it's so good I wish I'd written it. Like, and I haven't said that, I don't think. I said that about Yuval Harari. Actually, I said it about one of his books. I said, "Jeez, I wish I'd written that. That was a bloody good book." I do want to ask a little bit about something that you and I spend an awful lot of time talking about: teaching, working in organizations as management consultants, talking about organizational culture, about which there's probably more bullshit spoken than any other organizational topic. And it's a pretty long list from which organizational culture has climbed to the top. So why is a lot of culture speak in organizations bullshit?
Well, I was thinking about this the other day because on Sunday I flew back from the UK on Sunday, and I was in Manchester Airport. And about a year ago, I was in Manchester Airport, and I took a picture on my phone, and that picture is in the book. And I went back to the spot where I took that picture to see whether or not the thing I took the picture of was still there. And I don't know whether I'm pleased or horrified to say that it is. But the thing was a poster on the wall of a chain cafe, and British listeners will be familiar with Greggs. For those in other parts of the world, Greggs it's a kind of institution in Britain. It's nationwide chain of cheap and cheerful bakeries. So essentially they sell, I'm doing them a slight disservice, but they basically sell pastries, sausage rolls to British construction workers. That would be kind of their classic product market fit description. And the picture that I took is this poster on the wall of their store in Manchester Airport, and it has the Greggs Pledge, which is the Greggs mission statement. And Greggs' mission is about making the world a safer and more prosperous place.
Oh, God almighty. Really?
Now, they sell wonderful sausage rolls, right? If you want to spend £2 on a sausage roll, go to Greggs. In what possible world are they making the planet safer and more prosperous?
Oh my God, that's crazy. Did you ever see Silicon Valley when it was out?
Yes, I think I did. Yes.
Yeah. There was a great conference, TechCrunch Disrupt, which, by the way, there is a real conference called TechCrunch.
Yeah, that's real.
And it has basically people, entrepreneurs, wannabe entrepreneurs, people looking for seed funding, etc. They go up and they get 8 minutes on stage to basically pitch their business. And it's so funny because we take these things for granted, but at the end of all of these, presumably dozens of people doing 8-minute pitches, they said, and we're making the world a better place, whatever the heck they were doing. And it's one of these things that your book does so well, and that Silicon Valley did so artfully well as well, is it takes something that normally would go unnoticed. So when Sam Altman would say, we're making AI in order to make the world a better place for humanity, right? Now, he's said that many times. And he's a very charismatic guy. He's very good at saying that. And, well, hearing it once, it sort of passes as, oh, yeah, that's a very noble thing. But when, as happens, mission statements is the one you've described, where every company has them. I think Starbucks has got one that sounds like, interplanetary salvation and so forth. So that is interesting. So I interrupted you, but the Greggs poster, what was it? Making the world a safer place?
Safer and more prosperous for humanity.
So that's a statement of purpose or a mission statement or vision statement, whatever you can call lots of different things. There are some fine-tooth different discriminations between those three concepts. Is that culture, or are they trying to make that culture?
Well, they're trying to make that culture, right? And I see that, and it's plainly absurd for me. If you work there,
you get to the guy
yeah.
in construction boots or saying like that. He's like, "Oh God, I hope this makes the world a safer and more prosperous place." It's just
and I'll segue into culture a bit in a moment, but I talk about this early on in the book. It's the first proper chapter after the introduction. Over the last 30, 40 years, whatever it is, as you say, we've become completely inured to this kind of bullshit. And it's every organization has to have this grandiose mission statement and this higher and higher purpose. Now, you can argue in the last kind of 8 months, 10 months since the change in the US government, things have maybe changed slightly. But the way that I put it in the book is that essentially, as there's been this growing crisis of meaning in Western society, you look at kind of organized religion has tended to drop off, certainly in Western countries. You've got this sort of societal fracturing that is happening. And work has become more and more meaningless. The whole bullshit jobs concept that David Graeber spoke about.
Scott Turkle 4 decades before that.
But at the same time, we've had this growth in work being the source of meaning and big corporates being the source of meaning and trying to convince us that selling widgets is some higher, noble calling. Now, if you're listening to this and you work in frontline healthcare or the not-for-profit sector, I grant you may well work for an organization that really does have a purpose that is noble and world-changing. If you work for a big corporate, newsflash, it's nonsense. Whatever they've got on the poster, the purpose is quarterly earnings.
Yes.
And
it's true. And you're right. Is that I shouldn't give more pitches from one of my books. I wrote a book that sold about 6 copies, The Spirituality of Work and Leadership. Nietzsche said God is dead, but he didn't mean that triumphantly. He said it's a bad thing. He says because that was the source of meaning. And what workplaces have tried to do is the secularization in most countries. I mean, even in non-secular countries, theocracies like the United States is trying to become something like that. Work is a semi-sacred discipline. There's an idea called the gospel of work. And it wasn't always thus, by the way. 120 years ago, people used to praise the virtue of idleness. Now, they were generally speaking thinkers and philosophers who were well-born, who had the luxury of spending some time idling. But this idea that work, especially in very work-centric cultures like the United States, it's incredibly work-centric. It's so funny. I asked the World Series of Poker is a big World Poker Championship, and I happened to ask a guy who works at it. I asked him, it finishes in July. I asked him, September, did you get some time off? Because it's 7 weeks of 6-hour, 6-day weeks and 14-hour days for this guy. I said, did you get some time? He said, I got a couple of days. And I said, why don't you take 2 weeks? And he looked at me as if I was from another planet. He said, I've never had, nor would I know what to do with that much holiday in my entire life. I don't think the Americans know just how work-centric America is and how much work is so idealized now. To find virtue in anything other than working hard is it almost a sacrilege. I mean, it almost rises to the level of religious sacrilege in the United States. And it's funny when you live in a culture, and for many Americans will be listening to this, that stuff is hidden from you. They always say fish can't see water. And that kind of work centricity, you just kind of take it for granted. You go about it. You take the conference call at 4:00 in the morning. You answer an email from your boss at 9:00 at night. If you have to work on Saturday, you freaking work on Saturday. Whatever these things become, these tacit expectations, which are organizational culture, tacit expectations, unwritten rules of the game, whatever you want to call it. becomes so much part of your DNA. There's a word, Gestalt psychology, you introject them. In the sense, they're these external cultural forces, work centricity, but you make them your own. Oh, work is very important to me, and I really like getting up at 4:30 in the morning so I can get on a conference call. IBM used to have them at 4 in the morning. We used to get up at 400. They used to put shit in my diary at 4 o'clock in the morning. Nobody asked me whether I should like to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and get on the phone with 100 partners. Perhaps because I hadn't read your book. You just kind of do it, and you assume that that's the way things done. And then, in order to not be horrified in it, people find some virtue in it. So this is a virtuous kind of sort of thing you might brag about. Is how things. Do you remember that? I don't know if it was the case in Australia. I worked in PwC London, and one of the things, people, might know hundreds of people that work casually, and you meet them in the lift, and you'd say, "How are you? How are you?" And that's the absolutely guaranteed that they would say that. And they say that, one, because they don't really want to answer your question, but two, because it's the virtuous thing to say. I'm busy. That's as if that's virtuous.
So
I live like that anyway.
So for the benefit of the listeners, I have a whole chapter on this topic in the book. The chapter is called Time.
I thought I was the only one who ever noticed that busy thing. Obviously, you're.
So the chapter begins, and if you're not familiar with this, immediately that you've listened to this, go onto YouTube and find this. The chapter begins with a description of a Monty Python sketch, and the Monty Python sketch is called The Four Yorkshiremen. Now,
yes,
I am from Yorkshire. So I am able to indulge in this anti-Yorkshire racism that the Monty Python does. But essentially, the skit is four older gentlemen sitting in white dinner suits at some kind of very expensive restaurant, reminiscing about the old days. And the gist of their conversation is, yes, they're rich now, but things were tough. They grew up poor. They had it hard. And they've got to where they are by hard work. And they engage in this very quickly, absurdly escalating game of things were tougher for me.
And I was a lad, we used to walk to school with our boots on. Is that
correct? That's the one. And whenever I see on LinkedIn, which happens every couple of days, whenever I see some post by some tech bro or wannabe influencer extolling the virtues of their routine and how they get up at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. to fit all this stuff in, I just think back to this sketch because it was supposed to be parody. It was supposed to be absurd, but it has become a how-to manual for modern life. Being busy, as you say, Paul, is a badge of virtue. And we have fetishized work for the sake of work.
That's a very good word. Is that a David Graeber word, or is that? I think it is. It might be.
Probably.
I think it might be. Yeah.
If you look at the stats, and I refer to the stats in the book, and these are available online. There's a lot of fairly solid data around this. But if you look at the stats in Western advanced economies, the working week has not really changed in about 100 years. So basically, since around the time that Henry Ford introduced the 40-hour week, the average working week contractually has not really changed.
Really?
Not really.
Not much, right? Okay.
Not really. No.
It's about how long? It's about 40 hours or more.
Yeah, it's about 40.
France.
Yeah, exactly. It's less than that if you're in France. But fundamentally, it has not really changed. Now, the overall hours worked has continued to decrease because in the rest of the world, not so much in the US, people now get more weeks a year of holiday. But for the weeks when people are at work, basically working hours have stayed the same. It's kind of accepted that unless you've got some kind of part-time arrangement for whatever reason, you work 5 days a week, eight hours a day.
Yeah.
And when you think of
7, 8, or 9 till 5, 6, or 7, more or less. Yeah.
And when you think about the technological change that's happened in the last 100 years, it's quite astonishing, because so much of the productive activity of the economy has been automated and made more efficient and faster. But the working week has stayed the same. And essentially, at a macro level, what we have done is create new and innovative ways to fill the time. And what's happened in the last 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, since the advent of the internet and email, is this explosion in communications technology. And so now the average office worker spends most of their time communicating with other office workers. I'd already published the book when this report came out, so it's not referred to in the book, but there's a Microsoft report from July this year. It's something along the lines of facing the infinite workday. And this is data that Microsoft has gathered from all of their enterprise subscribers worldwide, which, you've got to think is a huge proportion of the world's office workers. And they have looked at the anonymized metadata, and what they see is that the average worker receives something like 120 emails, 150 Teams messages, and is interrupted by a notification from a Microsoft product approximately every 2 minutes. Now,
you're doing my nut just listening to that, mate. That's horrible.
Now, yeah. So just stop and think about that.
Any more emails than that? I get 400 a day or something like that. But I do turn off all notifications.
But the terrifying thing about those stats, Paul, is not those stats. It's what's not in those stats, because that's the Microsoft data. Microsoft don't have access to WhatsApp, to Telegram, to text messages, to Slack, to Zoom, right? Yeah. And the picture that this data paints is this hopelessly distracted, brain-fried workers whose answer to how are you is always busy, because they are always busy. But does all of this communication need to happen? Does all of this communication drive productive outcomes? Or is it just, to use that word again, performative?
Yeah. That's really great. That's really great. You've got a copy of the book behind you. Why don't you finally grab hold of it and show it to people?
Yeah, 1 second.
Got a very tidy bookshelf, man. Very impressed. Here we go. BS at Work by the Honorable James Healy. It's a magnificent book, folks. Really is wonderful. And I will be talking to James again, because actually, James, I want to talk to you about AI, but I'm hesitate to even mention the word, because I know you've got a lot to say about that. And since writing Adopting AI with you, which came out in March of 2025 or so, and we are now October 2025, so that's not very long ago, my usage has probably increased 10x, 12x in AI. And I gotta say, I love it, which either means I'm mentally ill or is bloody useful or a bit fun or both.
Or both. I was going to say both.
I have Claude, ChatGPT on it. I've got Gemini in all my things. I've got Copilot in my mind as a Gemini in my Ghost. So I got 4 LLMs. I really mostly use Claude and GPT. It got to the stage where I was using GPT for the sort of more intellectual stuff, but I didn't want to interrupt the thread of the conversation, because then you got to scroll up and find out where you were. So now I use Claude for like everything else. So it's just kind of interesting. So now I'm using Claude, which is a little bit more cuddly anyway. And it's certainly the only, I would say, Dario Amodei, who runs Anthropic, is one of the most value-centered of that whole tribe of tech bros, anything like that. And I got it all. And then I also have all of the AI native applications. I mean, almost everything today that you used to use as a standalone now has AI integrated, and there are also some AI native stuff coming out. So I'm drowning in it. I don't say that as a complaint. So I'm actually loving it. I'm really, really enjoying learning it. I really find it very interesting. And most of my research and most of my writing and most of my scholarship and most of my speaking is on AI, and I find it rewarding. Like, I'm at the age where I don't do anything I don't freaking like, right? So if I don't like doing it, I just don't do it, right? So I always do it. It's a luxury I wish I'd discovered when I was young, because, you know, we were talking about workplaces and how you fall into things. And I fell into this, and then I fell into that, and then I fell into management consulting, and then I thought one day, okay, I'll start my own company. And I sort of fell into that, and then I said, why don't I teach at university? I sort of fell into teaching into a university, and you fall into the rhythm of the organization and somebody else. Even if you're relatively senior, you're dancing to the beat of others' drummers. So even if you're one of my friends who became a chief executive said, oh, I thought I'd have a lot of power when I became CEO. Sorry, mate. It doesn't actually work that way. Everybody is accountable to someone, and everybody has got puppeteers pulling their strings in every organization. But I have the luxury, anyway, as you now, congratulations on your anniversary, of don't do anything I don't want to do, which is a luxury that not a lot of the world enjoys. So we can take a moment to be grateful for the lives that we have, right? I mean, we paid our dues, right? You paid 20 years working for the man, right?
In the words of Bob Dylan, I forget which song, it's probably titled after this line, but in the words of Bob Dylan, you're going to have to serve somebody. It might be the devil, it might be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody.
Amen. How are you enjoying it, by the way? So someone who wrote a book called BS at Work. Is your work full of BS?
No. It's not like you. I don't do things I don't want to do. I don't now have meetings that I don't want to be at. Wow. I don't talk to people that I don't want to talk to.
Talk to people I don't like.
And I think I'd be interested in your reflections on this, but I look back and I wonder how I survived. I wonder how I survived with busyness. I wonder how I managed to be on back-to-back calls for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. I wonder how I managed to achieve anything or make any decisions. And it's not a healthy way of being.
Yeah, and how you got home, and with fully functioning brain, never to hug your kid and kiss your wife and play with the animals and all that kind of fun stuff. And yeah, you live a very healthy. I mean, your morning routine, at least as far as I know you, has always been you. This lucky son of a bitch, by the way, listeners, lives about a mile from the beach or something like that. Closer than that, is that right?
Yeah, it's about that.
Yeah, you seem to have, I would say master is a stupid word to use. You seem to have embraced the idea of having some balance and enjoyment. So I'm glad you're liking it, by the way. And judging by your LinkedIn posts, we've got some good stuff happening. Would you like to tell listeners how they can get in touch with you and what you do to make money when you're not walking on the beach?
Well, I am a speaker. I'm obviously an author. We've spent the last hour talking about my book. I am a keynote speaker. I'm executive advisor, consultant, applying behavioral science to organizational problems. You can find me on LinkedIn. Please connect. You will then stay up to date with everything I do. I have my own podcast series, The B Word, which features me interviewing experts from the world of social and behavioral science.
Yeah, well, experts, and I think I was even on it, so you made an exception.
You have been on it a couple of times. And I'm really fascinated by humans and human behavior and fascinated by organizations. And I'm passionate about trying to make them, I won't say something grandiose. I'm not necessarily trying to make them better. I'm just trying to make them less full of bullshit. And they are very much full of bullshit, as BS at Work will tell you.
Yeah. All right, let's leave it there and let's do another one on artificial intelligence. I'm sure there will be a lot to say about artificial intelligence in the not too distant future. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Do connect with both James and me on LinkedIn, and do check out BS at Work. Thanks, James.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Thanks for listening. Again, BS at Work. Here you are.
All right.